proceed. This is our third session. Before I forget, inshallah, next week and the week after, for the next 2 weeks, I will be absent. Inshallah, leaving for Minnesota and then Kuwait for the next 2 weeks. So we will resume, inshallah, in the beginning of April, right? So, So the following 2 Saturdays, I will be out of the country. The 22nd and 29th, I'll be out of the country. The next, so our next class will be on the 5th of April, inshallah. Meanwhile, you want to make sure that you leave your emails so that I can send assignments and things like that through Abu Sumayya. And he should, inshallah, send you this, the whole Unit 1, so that you could study it. Whatever we finished, you would, study that, and whatever we have not finished, you could read it beforehand, so that you will be ready when we come back to it, inshallah. In the first session, we talked about a lot of introduction in the first session. And in the second session, we talked about the definition of fiqh, linguistically and technically, according to the earlier scholars, right? So we talked about the definition of fiqh linguistically, and we talked about the definition of fiqh according to the terminology of the earlier scholars. This is what we talked about last time, right? Fiqh from a technical point of view, according to the terminology of the early Muslims. And then, so what did we say about fiqh according to the terminology of the early Muslims? What did we say about fiqh in general, in terms of the language? What's fiqh in terms of the language?
It's the knowledge of some subject, like your comprehension.
Knowledge, understanding, comprehension. Yeah, knowledge, understanding, comprehension. So is basic knowledge fiqh? Is knowledge fiqh?
Yes.
Or not? According to Shaykh al-Ashqar rahimahullah, he considered knowledge to be fiqh, even without comprehension of subtleties or anything, to have some knowledge, because knowledge is the basis of understanding. You will have to have information so that you could understand those information. If you don't have the information, the data, you will not be able to process the data. So it is part of fiqh to have the foundation of information that is part of fiqh. So fiqh cannot be the mental capacity of deduction without having the data that you deduce from, without the knowledge and having the data that you deduce from. So it's the combination of both. So you will have the data, and then you will process the data. The data is the knowledge, and then you process the data. And after you process the data you would have added to the body of knowledge, right or wrong? Because you have the data, you have like the hadith, and then you process the hadith, and then you come up with a ruling. The ruling adds to the body of knowledge. So it is knowledge, comprehension, knowledge. There is a basic knowledge, followed by comprehension of this knowledge, to add to that body of knowledge, new knowledge, which is the knowledge that has been deduced from the original data. Sahih? Okay. So that is the fiqh linguistically. So it is the knowledge and comprehension, and it is the mental capacity to deduce the rulings or to deduce benefits from the data. Now, fiqh, according to the terminology of the earlier scholars, in summary, what was fiqh according to the terminology of earlier scholars?
as you said, I mean, it's understanding and the knowledge and the comprehension of a subject. It was not concentrated only to the
Yes.
Islam or the Deen.
No.
On the scholars,
And,
the entire
in terminology, in linguistic terminology, it does not pertain to the deen only in language. But for the earlier scholars, it became pertinent to the deen only, but not a particular discipline in the deen. And then we said that it included al-aqidah, al-fiqh, wal-akhlaq. Aqidah, fiqh, and akhlaq were all included under the title of fiqh, which is your understanding of the entirety of the deen. And we give the example of, for instance, Imam Abu Hanifa calling his book on Aqidah al-Fiqh al-Akbar. His book on Creed, he called it al-Fiqh al-Akbar, the greater fiqh. Okay, today inshallah we will go over al-Fiqh according to المتأخرين. الفقه في اصطلاح المتأخرين according to the terminology, or fiqh according to the terminology of the latter generations. So the latter generations began using the term fiqh particularly for the science of Islamic law. They limited it to imply knowledge of the practical legal rulings. And then when we go over the definition, inshallah, of fiqh, the various definitions of fiqh, we will see why they used those definitions. Sadr al-Sharia, which is Ubaydullah ibn Mas'ud, said after the first generation passed, the science of fiqh was used to refer to the practical rulings that are derived from detailed evidences, either by generalization or analogy. Thus, fiqh became more specific while maintaining its original discipline. بعد الصدر الأول اختص علم الفقه باستنباط الأحكام العملية من الأدلة التفصيلية بطريق العموم والشمول أو بطريق الاستتباع فتصرفوا فيه بالتخصيص لا بالنقل والتحويل. So basically what Sadr al-Sharia says is that fiqh became pertinent only to the practical legal rulings after the earlier generations. So the definition of fiqh, according to the Amidi here, we'll take this definition and then we will dissect it. So the Amidi, rahimahullah, said, define fiqh as knowledge of, yeah.
Can you explain what you mean by that?
So he's talking about the extrapolation being either by generalization or by deduction. Generalization is when you have one application and you're generalizing from this application, which is easy. It is basically when they share the same. It is قياس اللغة. قياس اللغة, not قياس in general. قياس in general is the deduction. اللي هو بطريق الاستتباع. So قياس in general is the deduction. قياس اللغة, which is linguistic analogy. Basically, you extrapolate to all that is applicable using linguistic analogy. So, لا تقل لهما أف لا تنهرهما, do not repel them, do not hurt them. By the linguistic analogy, you will use the word hurt in all of the, whatever applies, whatever applications of the word hurt, do not hurt your parents, then you will say this is hurt, this is hurt, this is hurt, this is hurt. That is linguistic analogy. But by deduction is when you apply it to something different, but it requires some subtlety of understanding, which is to apply the ruling of wine to cocaine, because you have verified that the cause of the prohibition of wine is intoxication, and you will say that cocaine is intoxicant, therefore it takes the same ruling as wine. Now, the process of verifying that the effective cause of the prohibition of wine is intoxication it's a form of ijtihad, and not everyone will be capable of doing it. And the process of verifying the presence of that effective cause in the new matter that is, for which you are trying to find the ruling is also a form of ijtihad, and not everyone will be capable of arriving at it through the mere understanding of language. The mere understanding of language. Unlike hurt, hurt, hurt. This is basically, this is hurting your parent, and this is hurting your parent, this is hurting your parent. So that is the difference between the generalization and the analogy. Generalization is using qiyas al-lugha, and the analogy is using the technical qiyas, which requires some understanding of subtleties. Now, the word that is as far as this بطريق العموم والشمول أو بطريق الاستتباع فتصرفوا فيه بالتخصيص لا بالنقل والتحويل. So they basically manage the terminology of fiqh. They specified it to a particular discipline. They did not transfer the meaning to a different meaning, but they specified it to a particular discipline.
So Adab al-Naql is referring to the definition itself. So they did not use the linguistic terminology. They did not move that to the discipline or change it, but they made it specific.
Yes.
Okay.
So meaning that they did not really depart from the linguistic terminology.
Just made it specific.
They narrowed the spectrum that it applies to. They did not move the linguistic terminology to transfer, switch, move, change the linguistic terminology and make it a Newton terminology, but they took that very linguistic terminology and they narrowed down the application of it to the discipline of fiqh as practical legal rulings versus other rulings versus creed, which is, your belief, and rulings of the interior, the heart, akhlaq, and so on and so forth. So he says here, so what Sadr al-Sharia said is that they use the fiqh to refer to the process of deduction of practical rulings, استنباط الأحكام العملية, from the detailed evidence via generalization or the deductive approach, which is analogical reasoning. So they then narrowed down the definition, فتصرفوا فيه بالتخصيص, narrowed down the definition, لا بالنقل والتحويل. They did not alter the definition. They did not alter the definition, the linguistic definition. They only narrowed it down. Then he moves on to al-Midi. So thus fiqh became more specific while maintaining its original meaning. Then he moved to the definition of fiqh according to Al-Amidi, rahimahullah. So Al-Amidi said knowledge of the legislative rulings as derived from their detailed evidences. And this particular definition of Al-Amidi is the one that has been generally accepted by the scholars. They tried to refine it, tried to add to it, but this is it. Knowledge of the legislative rulings is derived from their detailed evidences. العلم بالأحكام الشرعية العلمية no, not العلمية العملية من أدلتها التفصيلية. العملية. Okay. So knowledge of the legislative rulings as derived from their detailed evidences. So fiqh is knowledge, like we said before. It is your knowledge of the detailed rulings, الأحكام الشرعية, the legislative rulings. So why did he say الشرعية العملية, which is not actually reflected in the translation of the practical legislative rulings? Knowledge of the practical legislative rulings as derived from their detailed evidences. العلم بالأحكام الشرعية العملية من أدلتها التفصيلية. Why did he say الشرعية? Certainly because we're talking about Islamic law. We're not talking about anything else. So شرعية means Islamic law, Islamic legislation. Islamic legislation. Now, العملية, why did he add العملية?
To restrict it to that which is beneficial.
Not that which is beneficial.
Fruitful.
No. Yeah.
To exclude the inner actions of the heart?
Yeah, to exclude the rulings that pertain to the interior. So in fiqh, it does not address the prohibition of prejudice. Fiqh does not address the virtue of humility. This is not because it is not fiqh. And this is not because it's not important. This is because it is separated into a different discipline. What would that discipline be called? Raqa'iq, tazkiyah. Some people call it suluk. Some people call it tasawwuf. So, but it has been separated from the body of fiqh. Separated from the body of fiqh. Why separated from the body of fiqh in the new definition of fiqh, according to the latter generations? Why? Why they separated those subjects?
To narrow it down. To the practical rule of
It is evolution of sciences in general. In sciences, you know, people would talk about microbiology, right? And then you will talk about bacteriology and virology as two different disciplines. And then you will talk about whatever else you narrow it down to. This is how sciences evolve. It is all like together, and then, you know, quantum physics, it becomes a different discipline. So this is how sciences evolve. Now, they looked into those rulings and they found obvious differences between the talk about, prejudice, pride, arrogance, self-conceit, عجب, كبر, غرور, etc., and the talk about shurut al-salah, the conditions of the validity of the prayer. When we talk about the conditions of validity of the prayer, they are well quantifiable. Measure, you say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and each one is quantifiable, measurable, like standardized. This is how you do it, and it's up to here, up to the elbow, including the elbow, stuff like that. Versus the talk about self-conceit or ujb. It's a completely different nature of topics. Therefore, they decided to separate between them and have this as a discipline and that as a different discipline. Now, we said that this came at some expense, at some price, that the fuqaha that were devoted to the study of fiqh became separated from the sciences of the interior, or many of them became separated, many of them, not certainly all, because the most deserving people of the scale are the fuqaha, the scholars who know halal and haram, because knowing the halal and haram is a prerequisite for avoiding the haram and doing the halal, and that is one of your surest means to tazkiyah, to purification. But we said many scholars that busied themselves only with the study of fiqh as the discipline, the modern discipline of fiqh, and did not really study the ahkam of the interior. They became sort of deformed to some extent. Those who did not, give attention to the ahkam of the interior. You become a mouthpiece. You become just like an intellectual phenomenon, but you're not the scholar in the true sense of the word that the Sahaba knew, that the Tabi'een knew. When Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal was asked about Ma'ruf al-Karhi and his knowledge, he said, كَانَ عِنْدَهُ أَصْلُ الْعِلْمِ خَشْيَةُ اللَّهِ. He had the root of all knowledge, the fear of Allah. So that is the scholar in their understanding. But then later on, when the disciplines separated so much, and some of the scholars who studied the discipline of fiqh separated themselves from the knowledge of, the interior and the knowledge of the heart and so on, they became unaware of the importance of those sciences. That does not apply to the greatest scholars of fiqh because those greatest scholars that we hear about, it would be quite difficult to believe that those were oblivious to the sciences of the interior. The great grand scholars of fiqh that we hear about, they would have not been oblivious to the sciences of the interior. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed them with all of this knowledge, so it is not expected of them the names that you remember, the scholars that you hear of, the great scholars, fuqaha and muhaddithin and so on. But we're talking about the whole body of scholarship. We're talking about the less, the lesser scholars. And those are the ones that are more in numbers, so they have like an impact, a huge impact on the population. So when they become less interested, less aware of the sciences of the interior, then they dry out the knowledge of fiqh from its sources of nurture, sources, because if you have no spirituality, infused into the knowledge of fiqh, it becomes a very dry knowledge. It becomes a very intellectual exercise. So to basically avoid to sort of conform to the necessary evolution of the science, but avoid the consequences of this evolution, you just need to continuously infuse the knowledge of fiqh with the speech about the interior, you know, the knowledge of the interior, and the wisdoms behind the legislation. And that is something that should not be missed. It is extremely important that you're talking about the wisdom, particularly here in the United States, particularly Muslims that live as minorities within a non-Muslim majority. Oftentimes, if you teach fiqh as like a dry subject, right, wrong, wajib, mubah, etc., without delving into the wisdoms of the legislation, it becomes really counterproductive. And it causes many people to be disinterested, and to causes many people to be suspicious. It causes some discomfort in people's hearts, because they are isolated from the wisdom of legislation, and they are being introduced to like a set of legislations that are completely foreign to them, without understanding their basic, you know, foundation and the wisdom behind them. They will not be comfortable with what they're learning. Even if they accept it at face value, even if they look to you like they are quite attentive and they're just, everything's good, but the shaitan is not going to leave them. Shaitan is going to come back to them and say, well, what's this ruling, or how come it says such and such, or how come there is a consensus on such issue? So as a teacher, you know, as a preacher, as a da'i, as an activist, as whatever you are, you should always reconnect to them, reconnect to the legislation, to its wisdoms, because sometimes the scholars, you know, the classical scholars, they omitted that from their books because it was basic knowledge, common knowledge. So you need to reconnect them, and you need also to establish the connection between the fiqh and its roots. You know, the Islamic theory in general is the root of this fiqh. The creed cannot be separated from fiqh. The spirituality cannot be separated from fiqh. So you need to make that connection one more time. Okay, so Al-Amidi said, العلم بالأحكام الشرعية العملية من أدلتها التفصيلية. So it is the knowledge of practical legislative rulings derived from the detailed evidences. So we said that practical because it is talking about the acts of the exterior. The acts of the exterior. And legislative because it's Islamic law, it's not something else. Rulings in ahkam. And what is al-hukm? Al-shara'i. Where does hukm come from?
حاكم.
Huh?
Wisdom?
حاكم. حكمة.
Hikmah. So, hakamatul faras is what? Is the
Rain.
rein. No, not the rein. What's the part that you put in the mouth of the horse? It goes into the mouth of the horse. The rein is basically the ropes that are attached to that part that you put in the mouth of the horse. What's the part, the middle part? What is that called in English? Huh?
No, bridle.
Bridle?
Yeah.
Really?
We just
I
searched
just
it.
Googled
You just researched it?
Yeah.
Oh, you're good. You're not going to medicine though. You should go.
We become a fattest.
So the bridle of the horse. That is the hakama. بني حكمي فتحكموا سفهاءكم إني أخاف عليكم وأن أغضب. O Bani Hakima, control the fools amongst you. I fear for you from my anger. So al-hukm comes from al-hakama, the bridle of the horse. So it comes from limiting, binding, controlling, like hakamat al-faras. So limit, to bind, to control, to have a control over someone. That is what hukm means. But that is where it comes from linguistically. But what is the technical definition of hukm? Technical definition of hukm is خطاب الله المتعلق بأفعال المكلفين من حيث كونهم مكلفين به. It is Allah's address to those that are subject to taklif, subject to rulings, in the sense of them being, subject to those rulings. Or خطاب الله المتعلق بأحكام المكلفين من حيث كونهم مكلفين به. It's Allah's address to you. It's Allah's commands, requirements, commands and prohibitions to you as a mukallaf, as someone liable for the rulings or addressed by the rulings, but not any khitab, because khitab Allah, or the speech of Allah that is directed to you as an addressee, is not limited to rulings, but it is limited, it is, khitab Allah could be about aqidah, could be about other matters, could be about stories of the ancient nations. But he said here, متعلق بأحكام المكلفين, that pertains to the rulings of the mukallafin, that pertains to the rulings binding to those who are liable for compliance, or those who are addressed by the rulings. But if you say that the hukm is خطاب الله متعلق بأحكام المكلفين, the speech of Allah that pertains to the rulings of the mukallafin, the rulings of the mukallafin, is not all about the rulings. Sometimes there is a speech of Allah that pertains to the rulings, but it is not in the form of command or prohibition. It is not for them to comply. It is just to inform them of the khitab, to inform them of the rulings, to inform them of the salah, for instance. But the hukm al-shar'i is the khitab, or the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addressing al-mukallafin, that from which you could actually come up with rulings that are binding on the mukallafin. So that is the definition of al-hukm al-shar'i. So knowing those ahkam, yes.
Regarding the word mukallafin, I was attending a lecture once, and I was told that it was something that was introduced due to the influence of Greek philosophy on Islamic law, because the general idea is that لا يكلف نفس إلا وسعها, that none of the rulings are actually a burden. So to call somebody a mukallaf is actually not in the spirit of the law. So was there a definition before مكلفين.
No, it is not against it is not against the spirit of the law. Because Allah said, لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. Allah will not burden a soul beyond its capacity, but Allah will burden the soul within its capacity.
جزاك الله خير.
Yeah, because there is the burden of taklif in general, and you can't deny that waking up for Salat al-Fajr is a form of burden. You know, it is not beyond your capacity, it is within your capacity, but it is, you know, it's, you know, making 5 prayers every day and fasting in Ramadan, you know, along the days of Ramadan, you know, jihad sometimes, stuff like that. These are burdens, but they are within the capacity. So, العلم بالأحكام الشرعية العملية من أدلتها التفصيلية, it is basically knowledge of the practical legislative rulings as derived from their detailed evidences. Okay. So we're taking each word here and trying to dissect each word. So the legislative rulings which is al-ahkam, and I hope you know that I didn't cause you much confusion with this hukm business. But inshallah I'll come up with like a good translation for كتاب الله المتعلق بأحكام المكلفين من حيث كونهم مكلفين به. But generally speaking, you understand. It is Allah's speech or address to you as a mukallaf in the sense of being a mukallaf, not in the sense of information, in the sense of direct taklif, command and prohibition, requirement, something that is required of you to comply with. So when he says, as derived from the detailed evidences, what does he mean by this? As derived from the detailed evidences. He means that fiqh is not only to know the legislative rulings, the practical legislative rulings. And you would not be faqih if you know, if you memorize this is halal, so and so said this is halal, and so said this is haram, and so said this is makruh. That is not fiqh. But fiqh is when you know, yes, this is halal because of such and such, is you know how it has been derived from the detailed evidences. To know the process. How did we come here? How did we arrive here? It is not just to take the end product as an end consumer. That is the lay person who only needs to take the end product because he is an end consumer. But it is not fiqh, and you would not be a faqih if you just know what the end product is, until you have known the process, derived from their detailed evidences. So what are the detailed evidences?
An ayah from Quran or hadith of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or basically any ijma of the sahabas, or
An ayah from the Quran or a hadith from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. These are the detailed evidences. What about the principles of jurisprudence and the legal maxims and so on and so forth? Why are they not included, although they are used for the derivation of ahkam? So when we say, like we said this morning in the fiqh of transactions class, we said what? We said al-ma'ruf kal-mashrut. That which is customary is like that which is stipulated in the contract. So this is a legal maxim. We said al-kharaj bid-daman, which is profit follows liability, or profit and liability are mutually inclusive, go hand in hand. That is also a legal maxim. Although this particularly if the one has been reported from the Prophet ﷺ, but not every legal maxim has been reported directly from the Prophet ﷺ. But why does he say here, أدلة تفصيلية, detailed evidences? What about the non-detailed evidences, the principles of Sharia? The objectives of Sharia sometimes are employed in deriving rulings, right? When the scholars say this is consistent with the objective of preserving one's life. And it is called upon in the derivation of rulings from those objectives of Sharia. So why did he only say here أدلتها التفصيلية, the detailed evidences?
Because these are the foundation in order to get there.
Good, that's what I want. You should go into medicine. No, this is because basically anything else that is used in the deduction of rulings will have to be eventually based on the detailed evidences. So even the legal maxims have to be you will have to basically you have to prove the legal maxim. You cannot just say because of such and such legal maxim without proving the legal maxim. How do you prove the legal maxim? From the detailed, from the Quran and Sunnah, from the ayat and the hadith. Now, why is it that we're not doing this? Like, why is it that we say al-yaqin la yazul bil-shak and we just carry on? Yaqin la yazul bil-shak, certainty is not negated by doubt, and we carry on. Because supposedly we should be, we should be done with this discussion. Otherwise, if we do everything from scratch, it's just going to take too long. But we are done with this discussion. You know and I know that this is a legal maxim that is established, agreed upon. So I don't need to prove each and every legal maxim for you. However, if I can test the legal maxim, you need to prove it to me. So if someone can test al-yaqin la yazul bil-shak, you probably don't want to be talking to him because you're just going to waste your time, give you a headache. Unless it's the student that wants to learn. But if he's actually like contesting as a contestant, then you just. But there are those legal maxims that could be contested by some, particularly when it comes down to the detailed legal maxims within the different branches of fiqh that are called dawabit fiqhiyya, or legal regulators. Then they could be contested, and sometimes they are madhab based and so on, so you can't use your own regulators and your own madhab in a debate with someone from another madhab. But once they are contested, so you tell me that we're in a debate, and you tell me that this is on the basis of such and such legal maxim or legal regulator, legal maxim or legal regulator, then I have the right, if this legal maxim is not agreed on by consensus, you have the right of telling you, but I don't agree with this legal maxim. Then what you need to do next is to prove your legal maxim to me through the detailed evidences. So everything went back to the detailed evidences, that is the ayat and the hadith. What about ijma'? Someone said ijma' here. What about ijma'?
Ijma' is regulated by, restricted by the Quran and Sunnah, or it's conditionally based on the detailed evidence.
And ijma is basically like a silent ijma, where a Sahabi ruled upon an event and nobody spoke against it. So that means that everybody was, for that decision.
Yeah, but I'm not talking about the nature of ijma', but ijma' in this context is based on the Quran and Sunnah because it is impossible. It is either based on a direct proof from clear direct proof from the Quran and the Sunnah, or it is, we would presume that there must be a proof from the Quran. It is impossible. People don't agree even when things are clear. So it is impossible for all of the scholars to agree upon a matter when there is not a proof from the Quran and the Sunnah. So in this case, ijma' itself went back to al-adillah tafsiliyya. And then you can extrapolate from ijma' for sure, and you can extend from ijma'. But ijma' in and of itself has to be based on the detailed evidences, because it is impossible for human beings to agree unless there is some clear proof. So Al-Amidi and Al-Amidi attributed this definition to Al-Shafi'i. As for Tajuddin al-Subki, he defined it as knowledge of the practical rulings as obtained from their detailed evidences. It was very, the difference in language here. He said, Al-Muktasab min al-Adillah al-Tafsiliyya. Al-Muktasab is like a beautiful word, or Al-Mustathmar. It basically, Muktasab comes from kasb, from earning, right? So that are earned from the detailed evidences. It is beautiful because of the connotations of it. Like, you feel like you're earning something. After you arrive at a ruling, you feel that you've earned something through your ijtihad, which is excelling. You have eventually earned something. Or mustathmar comes from thamara, which is fruit. And you feel like you picked the fruit at the end of your ijtihad. You were able to pick the fruit of the tree. So clearly, these definitions are similar. Their definition of fiqh is very precise, and it shows the keen perspective which the Muslim scholars have regarding the sciences of fiqh. Below is a clarification of the elements of this definition. So fiqh is a science. It covers a specific theme and has its own exclusive rules and principles. On this basis, the fuqaha treated it in their books, researches and fatawa. It is not merely a technique, as some scholars claim. So that is the first part of the definition, which is al-ilm bil-ahkam al-shar'iyya. So fiqh is a science that has its own bases and foundations and principles, and it is not a technique or basically a mental capacity. Because we said fiqh is beyond this, is more than this. It includes all of that. It is the technique, it is the mental capacity, it is the knowledge that you will use to produce more knowledge through a process in which is a technique in which you use your mental capacity. Right? So it is the knowledge of the detailed evidences that you will use to produce more knowledge of the end product, final rulings, ahkam al-shar'iyya, halal, haram, mustahab, makruh, etc., through a technique, and this technique, through this technique or this process, you will use that mental quality of the faqih, who is capable of deduction of subtleties from the detailed evidences. So fiqh is not only the technique, it's not only the process, it is the combination of all. So it is a science that has a specific theme, rules and principles. Secondly, fiqh is the science of legal rulings. Legal rulings are those handed down through verbal transmission and taken from the religion itself. They are not based on simple common sense, such as knowing that this world was created or that 1 equals half of 2, etc. They are also not rulings that can be merely based upon the human senses, such as the knowledge that fire burns. They are also not derived from linguistic jargon or complex grammatical rules. A legal ruling is a rule given by the legislator on a certain issue. When this rule commissions the individual with a certain practice, it is called a hukm taklifi, binding legal ruling. When this rule does not commission the individual in and of itself, then it is called a hukm wada'i, or a declaratory law. Okay, so basically fiqh would be the understanding of those legal rulings as derived from the detailed evidences of the Quran and the Sunnah. Because there is basically different types of ahkam. There is al-hukm al-shar'i, that is what we were talking about, versus al-hukm al-aqli, versus al-hukm al-urfi al-wada'i, versus al-hukm al-lughawi. So al-hukm al-shar'i is the legal hukm, the legal ruling. Then there is al-hukm al-urfi, which is al-wada'i wal-urfi. So al-hukm al-wada'i is basically the natural rules, like fire burns. That is not a hukm shar'i. That is a natural rule. And then there is al-hukm al-urfi, which is the customary rule. We've come to know that prune juice helps with constipation. That's a customary rule. It is not a legal ruling or a rule, it is customary. So you have the customary, you have the natural, you have the aqli, which is the intellectual one, logical ruling. Al-aqli would be what? The whole is bigger than the part. 1 is half of 2. These are ahkam aqliyya. They're deduced through an intellectual, inductive process only. Right? So this is a hukm aqli. The whole is bigger than the part. This hukm al-aqli is different from al-hukm al-urfi, which is the customary ruling of prune juice, because you would have not known about prune juice unless you tried it. But the whole is bigger than the part. It does not require previous experience. Your intellect is capable of this induction without previous experience. The whole is bigger than the part, or the part is smaller than the whole. And then there is the hukm al-lughawi, which is the linguistic ruling. That's the rulings that are given by language. So al-hukm al-shar'i that we're talking about is different from al-hukm al-aqli, it's different from al-hukm al-urfi, it's different from al-hukm al-lughawi. It is al-hukm al-shar'i that is deduced not from your aql, not from the mere language, not from your experience as a human being, but from the revelation. That is why it's called the hukm al-shar'i. Now, al-hukm al-shar'i itself is divided into 2 different types. The taklifi, which is the binding, and the wada'i, which is the declaratory. What is the difference between the taklifi and wada'i? Declaratory. Yeah.
One is binding, like will require you to do something. For example, salah is taklifi. Now you have to pray. I'm guessing hukum wada'i would be, for example, hukum that Ramadan starts after this point, like the moon is in this. It's declaring that after the moon is in this state, then Ramadan will start.
Yes, that is right. So al-hukm al-taklifi is that you have to fast in the month of Ramadan. Al-hukm al-wada'i is that the month of Ramadan starts upon sighting the moon. Is that hukm or not? The month of Ramadan starts upon sighting the moon. It's hukm, right? But are you required to do something about it? You're not required to start, to turn the moon. You're required to look for the moon collectively as a Ummah. You're required to look for the moon. But the very hukm that Ramadan starts upon sighting the moon is not something that you need to do something about. But sometimes you get a little bit confused because sometimes there are ahkam wada'iyya that you need to do something about. So conditions of validity are considered to be ahkam wada'iyya or taklifiyya? Conditions of conditions of obligation, conditions of validity.
Both.
You know the difference between condition of obligation and validity? Shart al-sihha and shart al-wujub. Shart al-sihha is a condition without which the ibadah will not be valid. So like you can't have salah without wudu. That is a condition of validity. Shart al-wujub, which is the condition of obligation, is a condition without which the salah is not obligatory. Like you need to be an adult for salah to be obligatory. That's a condition of obligation. The time has to have entered. It's a condition of obligation. Right? So conditions are in general are part of al-hukm al-wada'i or al-hukm al-taklifi. Wada'i. Conditions. You're not mukallaf to become an adult.
No, but to make wudu and to purify your clothes.
Thank you. Okay. So now sometimes you're not mukallaf about the conditions at all. So in most cases you're not mukallaf about the conditions. You're not mukallaf about being aqil, sane. You're not mukallaf about being adult. You're not mukallaf about, the starting of the month. You're not mukallaf about most of these declaratory laws. You're not mukallaf about earning the threshold of zakah so that you could give zakah. Because zakah is not obligatory until you reach your money reaches the threshold, which is called the nisab, which is the zakatable minimum or the threshold for zakah. To be, right? You have to have a certain amount of money so that the zakah becomes binding on you. Are you mukallaf to earn that money? No. You're not mukallaf to earn the money so that you have to give zakah. It is just that if you earn that much money, then you will need to give zakah, but you're not mukallaf to earn the money. But you are mukallaf to make wudu for the salah. And the wudu is a condition of validity. Right? So sometimes there is this overlap between al-hukm al-wada'i, the declaratory law, and the binding or al-hukm al-taklifi. But simply in this case, the الحكم التكليفي will have been established through the detailed evidences as a حكم تكليفي. There will be another khitab, another address concerning the obligation of wudu. Concerning the obligation of wudu. To make wudu obligatory on you, there will be another address concerning the obligation of wudu. So still declaratory laws, you don't need to do much about them. They are just there to inform you that the salah will become binding on you when the sun reaches the zenith. You're not responsible for making the sun reach it. Just the salah becomes, dhuhr becomes obligatory when that time comes. Yes, ma'am.
Sheikh, can it be considered circumstantial law?
Circumstantial, that, well, no, that would be the other translation for declaratory laws. They call them circumstantial. Yeah. But declaratory would be better because it is basically, these are laws that are to inform you of something, to declare something, to declare that the beginning of Ramadan is when the moon is sighted. That Salat al-Zuhr starts from the time the sun reaches its zenith. So examples, repaying a debt is obligatory and murder is prohibited. Obligation in the first case and prohibition in the second case are binding legal rulings. These are ahkam taklifiyya. They enjoin either performing an action, such as repaying a debt, and avoiding an action such as murder. As far as the declaratory legal rulings, one declaratory legal ruling is the fact that Sharia invalidates any contract drawn up by an irrational person. Insane, I guess. Does it say irrational or does it say insane? That, you know, irrational would invalidate a lot of contracts. Wait a second. الشرع نص على بطلان عقد المجنون. No, المجنون is not irrational. Irrational will invalidate most of the contract. This is a joke. Insane. Invalidity is the declaratory legal ruling which was resultant of the insane. There is nothing called irrational in Sharia because irrational to you is rational to me. Insane person drawn up a contract while no action was commissioned of anyone in this case. Basically, the fact that legal contracts by insane people are inconsequential, this is not a command or a prohibition. It is just a statement. Know that a legal contract. Now, based on this knowledge, the judge, but this knowledge in and of itself is not legally binding. There is no requirement. It is for your information. But eventually, the declaratory rulings are not just there for your information only. They will be consequential. There will be something to do about it. So here, there will be something for the judge to do. The judge will need to invalidate that contract. If someone, bought like a house from an insane person, the judge will say no, the sale is invalid unless, the contract is made with the custodian. Because every insane person, like every child, needs to have a custodian to look after their interest. Thirdly, fiqh is the science of practical rulings. The word practical here means that fiqh rulings are related to issues practiced by people, such as acts of worship and daily transactions. Practical rulings deal with the body rather than the heart. We did go over this. Fourthly, fiqh is derived from the detailed evidences. This means that rulings do not belong to the science of fiqh unless they are based on the well-known sources of Sharia. A faqih is one who traces back each legal ruling to its evidences. Islamic law or fiqh is not enacted by the state. Rather, it is a religious legislation that depends solely on religious texts. This definition limits fiqh to rulings derived by considering the evidences. As for rulings adopted via taqleed, blind imitation, without thorough consideration of the evidences, they do not belong to fiqh. So, mere taqleed does not belong to fiqh. Detailed evidences or mere blind following. Taqleed is blind following or blind imitation. Detailed evidences refer to specific proofs from the Quran and Sunnah, such as Allah's saying, prohibited to you are dead animals, blood, the flesh of swine, etc. Also, the Prophet ﷺ said that adorning gold and silk has been made lawful for the females of my ummah and unlawful for its males.
It says lawful, it should say unlawful.
And unlawful for its males. In contrast to the detailed evidences are the holistic evidences. These latter evidences are controversial. According to the scholars of Usul al-Fiqh, the fundamentals of fiqh, since they are concerned with the fundamental evidences from the Noble Quran, the authentic Sunnah, consensus analogy, and the likes. Also, they focus on the implications of the proofs in the Quran and Sunnah. So basically, those let's say, for instance, of these formulated fundamentals are the following. A command that implies obligation unless there is a textual connotation that indicates it being merely desirable. A prohibition implies unlawfulness unless there is a textual connotation that implicates it being merely undesirable. There is a mistake in translation here. In contrast to the detailed evidences or the holistic evidences, these latter evidences are the subject of research by the scholars of Usul. But basically, let's go back to the, inshallah, you will get another document from me, because I did not really get a chance to read that translation, all of it. I went, sort of skimmed over it quickly to get the document ready to send it to you, but inshallah I'll go back and look at the translation one more time. And read through it one more time. It's a very good translation, it's a very good translator, but there are certain things as far as the source language, the understanding of the source language requires like some technical knowledge. Anyway, so the holistic evidences that we're talking about here, the usuli evidences, are not mentioned here. What is mentioned is the detailed evidences from the Quran and the Sunnah. And basically I told you why. Because the usuli principles will need eventually to be proved by the Quran and the Sunnah. Right? So when you say, when you mention this usuli principle, a command implies obligation, unless there is textual connotation. This is an usuli principle that indicates it being merely desirable. There is also the legal maxims, qawa'id al-fiqhiyya, and the difference between usul al-fiqh and the legal maxims, we can discuss this inshallah next time. But these are all holistic evidences. We said that they have to be eventually proven by detailed evidences from the Quran and the Sunnah. Because that very statement, what is the proof on this statement? A command implies obligation unless there is textual connotation that indicates it being merely desirable. And the prohibition implies unlawfulness unless there is textual connotation that indicates it being merely undesirable. So in every command from the Prophet, the default is that every command from the Prophet means wajib. It does not mean mustahab. When do you interpret the command to mean mustahab? If there is textual connotation. If there is something in the text that would point to that direction. The proof on this is ما نهيتكم عن شيء فاجتنبوه وما أمرتكم به فأتوا منه ما استطعتم. Whenever I command you to do something, do of it as much as you could. Do of it as much as you could within your capacity, because beyond your capacity you're not responsible. And whenever I forbid you from something, abstain from it, refrain from it. This could be invoked here to prove this principle. وَمَا أَتَاكُمُ الرَّسُولُ فَخُذُوهُ وَمَا نَهَاكُمْ عَنْهُ فَانْتَهُوا وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَا مِن رَّسُولٍ إِلَّا لِيُطَاعَ بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ. All of the ayat that talk about the obedience of the Prophet ﷺ would mean that it is not optional for you to obey him or not. When he gives you a command, it's not optional for you to obey him or not. So this very principle itself is proven by ayat and hadith. Therefore, it all goes back to adillat al-tafsiliyya, or the detailed evidences. Even the holistic evidences, we will have to trace them back to their roots in the detailed evidences. Yes.
Good question. Is it referring to the same concept of saying that unless there is a ruling in the deen, you don't do it? And in the rulings of the dunya, unless it is restricted, you can do it. Like for instance, if it is restricted to eat swine, you don't eat swine. But if there is no restriction on eating, let's say kale, the bird, then we can eat it. So that's like on the rulings of the dunya, and on the rulings of the deen, it's like if it's said not to, it has nothing to go and about the sila, then you don't do it.
So you're talking about الأصل في العبادات الحظر والأصل في المعاملات الإباحة. The default concerning worship. It is not rulings of the deen or rulings of the dunya. It is the two spheres in which fiqh operates. Fiqh operates in the sphere of worship, that's your relationship with Allah. And in the sphere of mu'amalat, interactions, that is your relationship with the creation, not the creator. So in the sphere of worship, fiqh al-ibadat, the fiqh of worship, in that sphere of fiqh of worship, the default is restriction until proven otherwise. So you can't initiate a ibadah. You can't instigate a new act of worship. But in the sphere of interactions, fiqh al-mu'amalat, or the sphere of the fiqh of interactions, that's interactions between you and the creation, not the creator, because an interaction between you and the creator is called worship. But in the sphere of the fiqh al-mu'amalat, fiqh of interactions, the default is the opposite. No restrictions until proven otherwise. So you could eat anything you want until it is proven haram. You could transact in whichever way you like until it is proven haram.
Sheikh, is this principle, is this one of those principles that are, it's a usuli principle, or is there something from the Quran and Sunnah to actually prove that, for ibadat it's like this, and for mu'amalat it's...
Just two, like an ayah and a hadith would prove this. هو الذي خلق لكم ما في الأرض جميعا. It is He who created for you all that which is on the earth. هو الذي خلق لكم ما في الأرض جميعا. It is He who created for you all that is in the earth. So that is basically to say that the default in interactions is permissibility. And as far as ibadat, the hadith of Aisha, من أحدث في أمرنا هذا ما ليس منه فهو رد. Whoever innovates in this affair of ours, starts something new in this affair of ours that does not belong to it, shall be rejected. So you wait until you're sure that it is prescribed in the area of ibadat. You do not have to wait in the area of mu'amalat until you know, but you will have to learn the fiqh of mu'amalat if you will be a merchant or something like this. You have to learn the fiqh of marriage before you get married, or enough of the fiqh of marriage to know, what is right and wrong and rights and obligations. Because otherwise, ignorance is not going to exempt you from, the consequences. Ignorance is not going to exempt you from the consequences if knowledge was required in the first place. If knowledge was required, then ignorance does not exempt you from consequences. Otherwise, it would be quite easy for everybody. If you're not going to learn anything, so then it wouldn't be, liable for anything, and that would be like an easy way out. Let's finish this quickly so that we finish this part. Fiqh covers both decisive and speculative rulings. This definition shows that fiqh covers the practical rulings which are qat'i, decisive rulings in the religion, such as the obligation of dhuhr, noon prayer, and the prohibition of wine. Those are the qat'i things, but and we really need to understand the difference between qat'i and dhanni, so that not that the dhanni or the speculative rulings, you will not talk about them, you will not preach, you will not debate, you will not sometimes commend and condemn, but you will eventually have to understand the difference between qat'i and dhanni, so that you do not become too rigid or too
Literal?
vicious, against your fellow brothers and sisters, and too certain of your own positions. So the Imam Shafi'i, with his great knowledge, he said that the qat'i would be, the matters of certainty would be like al-dhuhr arba' wal-khamru haram. The dhuhr is 4 rak'ahs and khamr is haram. That is the kind of qat'i that Imam Shafi'i says these are matters of certainty and people should not be debating about them. But for us, we have like thousands of rulings. Whatever it is that is a matter of certainty, which could be somewhat, troublesome. It also covers the dhanni, speculative rulings, such as whether or not touching a woman invalidates ablution, or whether it's obligatory to wipe over the entire head or just a part thereof when performing ablution, etc. So these are the dhanni rulings. He said controversial issues, touching a woman invalidates the wudu or not. Is it obligatory to wipe over the entire head or just a part of the head in wudu? These are dhani issues. And that is why we said that fiqh includes not only, so fiqh will include dhuhr arba, and there is only one opinion here. So that is recorded, that is fiqh. But fiqh will include, you need to wipe over one hair, Shafi'i. You need to wipe over 1/4 of your head, Hanafi. You need to wipe over your entire head, Hanbali. Fiqh will include all of the above. That is fiqh, that is fiqh, that is fiqh. Until you could say that you could be the arbitrator, the sort of the chief arbitrator, we will say that this is fiqh, fiqh, fiqh. Now, you don't need to be the chief arbitrator to say, I believe this is stronger. I believe this is more, like in accordance with the Sunnah. This is more basically evidence-based. You could say that without claiming to be the chief arbitrator. But if you transfer the issue from the area of speculative rulings to the area of certain qat'i definitive rulings, now you've made yourself a chief arbitrator over the deen. Some other scholars, such as Al-Razi, had a different viewpoint. They believe that decisive rulings are not covered by fiqh. So they said that dhuhr is arba' is not fiqh, because that does not really require any mental capacity, mental quality, any process, nothing. But we said last time this is fiqh, right? Because if we say it is not fiqh, then we're building without a foundation. Because, dhuhr is 4, and then each one of these units is made up of qiyam and ruku' and sujood, and the qiyam consists of, reciting the Fatiha. And then we get into, do you have to recite the Fatiha behind the Imam? But all of it has to be established on what? Dhuhr is 4 rak'ahs. This has to be established on Salah is obligatory. So you build from down up, all the way down, and you go up. And the farther up you go, then you start to get into the controversies. So some other scholars, such as Al-Razi, have different viewpoint. They believe that the decisive rulings are not are not covered by fiqh. Ibn al-Humam had completely different view from that of Al-Razi. He limited fiqh to the decisive rulings, while claiming that speculative rulings have no place in fiqh. Both views could be refuted by the method which the fuqaha wrote their books, since they included both decisive and speculative rulings therein. Furthermore, the decisive and speculative rulings are not agreed upon between all the Muslims. So there are these certain rulings that are certainly certain, and there are those certain rulings that are not certainly certain. That's the area of controversy. Does this belong to the decisive or to the speculative? So there are certain areas that are certainly agreed upon to be this speculative, and there are certain areas that are agreed upon to be decisive. And there are those things in the middle where, they say that this matter has been established by consensus. But then they say, no, really was the consensus reported on this? Is this like a true consensus? But, Ibn Ulayya or this or that disagreed, and that would invalidate the consensus. So then there is this discussion over this area in the middle between the clearly decisive, dhuhr is 4 rak'ahs, and the clearly speculative, touching a woman does not invalidate your wudu or not. Clearly speculative, clearly decisive, And then there is the area in the middle where they disagree over whether it's decisive or speculative. Furthermore, the decisive, so basically he's saying all of the above will be included in fiqh because that is what the fuqaha did. They included the clearly decisive, the clearly speculative, and the controversial, whether it's decisive or speculative. They included all of this in their books. Rather, some scholars may have numerous proofs. So he's saying to both Ibn al-Humam, the author, Shaykh al-Ashqar, he's answering, the claim of Razi, rahimahullah, and Ibn al-Humam, rahimahullah. Razi said it's only speculative that's considered fiqh, because it is not fiqh to say Dhuhr is 4 rak'ahs. Ibn al-Humam says it's only the decisive that is considered fiqh, because we don't know if the other positions are correct or incorrect, so we will not consider them to be fiqh. But we said that this is Sharia. Sharia is what is clearly, the intended by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but fiqh includes the correct and incorrect. So he's answering to them, and he says, even the distinction between decisive and definitive is not agreed upon. So if you say that it is only the speculative, the decisive and the speculative, distinction is not agreed upon. So if you say that fiqh pertains only to the speculative, people would disagree whether this is speculative or not. If you say that fiqh is only limited to the decisive, people will still disagree whether this is decisive or not. So fiqh includes all of the above. Rather, some scholars may have numerous proofs that make them believe that a particular ruling is decisive, while others do not have such proofs. This is the case among the scholars, and hence others will find more controversy on such issues. So basically, fiqh includes all of the above: decisive, speculative, and the area in the middle. Yes?
What formula do you use for the ruling? Do you go with the one that you feel is a stronger ruling, or the majority?
Oh, so how do you choose between the rulings? No, how do you choose between the rulings that differ? There is a difference between the scholars have to always base their choice on the detailed evidences of the Quran and the Sunnah. They must base their choices on the detailed evidences of the Quran and the Sunnah. The non-scholars, they have the taqleed, but then their taqleed will be to find the person that is most trustworthy and knowledgeable in their assessment and do taqleed. Now, is there something between the scholars and the public? Something in the middle between the scholars and the public? Or those public that do taqleed, will they be ever asked to look into the evidence at any point? Yes, yes. When you go to a physician to tell you, you need surgery to get your appendix out, and you go to another physician and he tells you you do not need surgery to get your appendix out, will you just base your decision on the reputation of the two physicians, or will you be talking to those two physicians and asking them questions? And why do you think I don't need to get my appendix out? Why do you think I need to get my appendix out? You will be talking to you will be asking them questions. The same applies here to this case. Yes, you will be a follower at the end of the day, because you may not, that physician will talk to you and the other physician will talk to you. You may not be able to comprehend the evidence completely of both physicians, but you will still ask, because that is part of doing your best to arrive at a conclusion that you feel is in your interest or your welfare. And you should do the same for your religion as well. After choosing the scholars that are trustworthy and knowledgeable, you will weigh the evidence of both sides, because that is how you, as much as you can. Unless it is a matter that is completely beyond your comprehension, and there are such matters that are completely beyond the comprehension of the layperson, and that is relative. Because, you know, the scholar and the layperson, it is not like scholar, layperson, and that's it. It is a continuum. Because the layperson learns and becomes a little bit more learned, learns more, learns more, learns more. You get to be a scholar, it's not overnight. It's not like something will descend on you from the heavens, and then now you're suddenly a scholar. It's a cumulative process, So you can't say that here you've become a scholar, and then it is all different now. But so it is relative, and that lay person is not one thing. It could be anything from completely ignorant of everything, you know, to someone who is a step away from being a scholar. So in this case, they will exert the utmost effort by choosing the scholars that they listen to, but also by weighing the evidences presented to them. Next time, inshallah, we will start with مقارنة بين الشريعة والفقه, comparison between Sharia and fiqh.